Nestled amidst the rugged peaks of Telluride, Colorado, the sprawling estate once owned by Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise was renowned for its breathtaking views, secluded charm, and luxury. But beneath its modern veneer lay whispers of a history that transcended time, a history that some claimed refused to stay buried. The property had originally been built in the late 1800s by a silver mining tycoon, George Latham, and his wife Eleanor. The couple, known for their eccentric yet generous nature, had hosted grand soirees on the estate. However, after the silver crash of 1893, they lost everything. Rumor had it that Eleanor, unable to bear the shame, spent her final days pacing the estate's library, clutching her prized locket, until she succumbed to a mysterious illness. George, devastated, followed shortly thereafter under equally strange circumstances. Decades later, when the Hollywood power couple purchased the estate in the 1990s, it had been impeccably restored. But it didn't take long for those who stayed at the house to notice something peculiar. One evening, during their first winter at the estate, Nicole hosted a gathering of close friends. The air was crisp, and a soft blanket of snow covered the grounds. As the group sat near the grand fireplace in the living room, one of the guests excused herself to use the restroom. Minutes later, she returned, pale and visibly shaken. There's a man standing by the staircase," she stammered. Tom, skeptical, grabbed a flashlight and investigated. Finding no one, he reassured the guest it must have been a trick of the shadows. But her description of a tall man with a thick mustache and an old-fashioned waistcoat matched photographs of George Latham hanging in the hallway. Nicole herself began experiencing odd phenomena soon after. While rehearsing lines for a film in the estate's library, she felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. At times, books would slide off the shelves without explanation, and the faint scent of lavender, a fragrance Eleanor was said to favor, would fill the air. One night, unable to sleep, Nicole returned to the library to find a faint glow emanating from the corner. As she approached, the figure of a woman in a Victorian dress became visible, seated by the window. The apparition held a delicate locket and appeared to whisper something inaudible before vanishing. Local groundskeepers employed by the couple spoke in hushed tones of sightings near the property's perimeter. They described fleeting glimpses of two figures, a man and a woman walking hand in hand under the moonlight. Despite the heavy snow, no footprints were ever found. One caretaker, a seasoned local named Hank, refused to work alone at night. He claimed to have encountered George near the old well. "He didn't say a word," Hank recounted years later, "but he stared at me with those piercing eyes, like he was sizing me up. I got the feeling he didn't want me there." By the early 2000s, Nicole and Tom had grown weary of the persistent activity. Despite their admiration for the estate, they decided to sell the property. The official reason given to the press was their desire for a fresh start. But insiders suggested the real motivation lay in the increasingly unsettling encounters with the guardians of the house. Today, the estate remains a topic of fascination. While subsequent owners have reported fewer disturbances, those who venture too close after dark often speak of eerie feelings and strange lights flickering in the windows. The ghosts of George and Eleanor Latham, it seems, continue to guard their beloved home, ensuring its legacy endures in the annals of Colorado's supernatural lore. After Nicole and Tom sold the estate, it passed into the hands of a reclusive tech entrepreneur named Vance. Known for his obsession with privacy, Aaron rarely made public appearances, and the sale went largely unnoticed. But within months of moving in, rumors began to trickle out from the few contractors and staff permitted on the property. The first to speak out was a young landscaper who quit abruptly after a single week. He claimed that while trimming hedges near the main house, he saw a woman in a long dress standing at the edge of the property, partially obscured by the treeline. She wasn't moving, he told a friend at a local bar, just staring. I waved, but she didn't wave back. When I looked down for a second to grab my tools and looked up again, she was gone. I felt this heaviness, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Aaron himself was a skeptic. He dismissed the landscaper's account as a fabrication and installed state-of-the-art security cameras throughout the property. Motion sensors were placed at every entrance, and a sophisticated AI monitored the grounds. But the system began picking up anomalies that Aaron couldn't explain. Footage revealed doors opening and closing on their own, and faint orbs of light floating through the hallways at night. More unsettling were the shadowy figures occasionally caught near the library and staircase. One evening, Aaron reviewed footage of himself sitting at the dining room table, scrolling on his tablet. Behind him, a translucent figure of a woman seemed to glide silently across the room. She paused, appearing to look directly at him, before fading into the shadows. Aaron rewound the footage repeatedly, unable to believe what he was seeing. The estate had one peculiar feature that baffled Aaron: a small, windowless room at the far end of the second floor. The previous owners had left it sealed, with no key to be found. Initially, Aaron ignored it, assuming it was a storage area. But over time, he began to notice strange noises emanating from the locked door: soft tapping, like fingernails against wood, and muffled whispers that grew louder at night. One night, unable to sleep, Aaron decided to break the door down. Armed with a crowbar, he forced it open. The room was empty, save for a single chair and a large, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. But as Aaron approached the mirror, his reflection didn't move in sync with his actions. Instead, it tilted its head slightly and smiled, a gesture Aaron knew he hadn't made. Aaron quickly shut the door, leaving the room untouched. Yet from that night on, his encounters grew more intense. He began hearing footsteps in his bedroom and waking to find the faint scent of lavender lingering on his pillow. One night, Aaron awoke to find the woman from the mirror standing at the foot of his bed. Her face was obscured by shadow, but her presence felt overwhelmingly cold. She pointed toward the window, where Aaron saw the silhouette of a man staring back at him from the grounds below. He blinked and both figures were gone. But when he checked the security footage the next morning, the system had recorded nothing unusual except for one thing. The camera outside the locked room had captured the door opening on its own in the early hours of the morning. The mirror inside had been turned to face the doorway. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Aaron began to question his sanity. The nightly disturbances escalated. Whispers that seemed to echo from the very walls, fleeting shadows darting just beyond his vision, and the inexplicable sound of a woman humming a forlorn tune. Determined to uncover the truth, Aaron delved into the estate's history, poring over archives, deeds, and old journals. What he found only deepened the mystery. An old newspaper article revealed that Eleanor Latham had been buried with her favorite possession, a gold locket containing a daguerreotype of her husband. However, according to a separate account from a local historian, her grave had been disturbed in the 1920s during the construction of a nearby railway. The locket was never recovered, and rumors swirled that her spirit now wandered the land in search of it. Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that the locked room and the strange behavior of the mirror held some connection to Eleanor. But every time he approached the room, an oppressive heaviness pressed against him, as though the house itself resisted his intrusion. Late one night, as snow blanketed the estate, Aaron stood at the large bay window overlooking the grounds. The moon cast an eerie glow over the trees, their skeletal branches swaying in the wind. That's when he saw them. Two figures, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other slight and delicate, were moving slowly along the edge of the property. The man carried a lantern that emitted a dim, flickering light. The woman clung to his arm, her head bowed as though in grief. Aaron froze, his breath fogging the glass. He reached for his phone to record the scene, but the figures vanished before he could capture them. The only evidence of their presence was a series of footprints leading into the forest, abruptly stopping at the treeline. A week later, a knock echoed through the grand entrance hall. Surprised Aaron rarely received visitors, he opened the door to find an elderly woman wrapped in a thick wool coat. Her eyes were sharp, almost unnervingly so, and her presence exuded an air of quiet authority. "You're living here alone?" she asked, her voice low and deliberate. Aaron hesitated. "I am. Can I help you?" The woman introduced herself as Margaret Latham, a distant relative of George and Eleanor. She explained that she'd been researching her family history and felt drawn to the estate. But as she stepped inside, her expression darkened. "This house," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the staircase. "It doesn't let go of the past." Margaret spoke of stories passed down in her family tales of Eleanor's despair and George's restless spirit. "They were deeply in love, but tragedy bound them here," she said. "If you've seen them, it's because they believe you can help." Aaron felt a chill creep down his spine. Help with what? Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned toward the locked room. "Have you opened that door?" Aaron nodded reluctantly. Her face grew pale. "Then they've already started showing you. Whatever you saw in there, whatever they let you see, it's only the beginning." Margaret stayed only for a short while, but her presence left an unsettling weight in the house. Before she left, she handed Aaron a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked with age, and inside, the ink had faded to a faint gray. "This belonged to Eleanor," she explained. "I found it among my family's belongings. It might give you answers or warnings." Aaron flipped through the pages after Margaret's departure, his hands trembling. The entries were fragmented, jumping between moments of joy and despair. One passage caught his eye, dated just days before Eleanor's death. "George says the house is ours no matter what. He promises we'll never leave, not even in death. But the locket, I feel it slipping away. Without it, I'll be lost. We'll both be lost." The words lingered in his mind as the snowstorm outside grew fiercer. That night, the power flickered out. The estate plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the fireplace in the living room. Aaron grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the basement to check the circuit breaker. As he descended the creaking wooden stairs, the air grew colder, each breath hanging visibly in the dim beam of his flashlight. The basement smelled of damp earth, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. But as Aaron approached the breaker box, his light caught something on the far wall, a faint outline of a door he had never noticed before, almost entirely concealed by old shelves. The door was covered in claw marks, as though someone or something had desperately tried to get in or out. Despite every instinct screaming at him to leave it alone, Aaron moved the shelves aside, revealing the door in full. It was made of heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, and a rusted padlock hung loosely from the latch. The padlock seemed brittle, as though it had been corroded over decades. He didn't need to force it. With a light tug, the lock broke apart, and the door creaked open. Inside was a small, stone-walled chamber lit faintly by a single, unexplainable candle burning in the corner. The flame didn't waver, despite the draft that swirled around Aaron as he entered. At the center of the room sat a pedestal, and on it lay an object that glinted faintly in the candlelight, a locket, golden and intricately designed, its chain draped over the edges. Aaron's pulse quickened as he reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal. But the moment he touched it, the air in the room shifted violently. The door slammed shut behind him, and the faint humming he had heard before grew louder, reverberating around the chamber. A voice soft, sorrowful, and unmistakably Eleanor's whispered from the shadows. "Why did you take it?" Aaron spun around, but the room was empty. The candle extinguished itself, plunging him into complete darkness. The footsteps began above him, faint at first but unmistakably deliberate. They echoed through the house, growing closer with each passing second. Aaron clutched the locket, his heart pounding as he pressed himself against the cold stone wall. The footsteps stopped outside the basement door, and he could hear the faint rustle of fabric, like someone adjusting their clothing. Then came the sound of the basement stairs creaking one slow step at a time. Aaron's breath came in shallow gasps as the creaking on the basement stairs grew louder. He tried to steady the flashlight in his trembling hand, but the beam flickered erratically, casting shifting shadows against the cold, stone walls. The footsteps stopped just beyond the chamber door. Then came the faint sound of a hand brushing against the wood, as if testing its surface. Aaron clutched the locket tighter, its edges digging into his palm. A voice, low and unfamiliar, drifted through the crack beneath the door. "Put it back." The words were slow, deliberate, and almost pleading. Aaron didn't move. He couldn't. His legs felt frozen in place, and his mind was racing. Was it Eleanor? Or was it something else entirely? The door didn't open. Instead, the voice receded, and the footsteps moved away, fading into silence. Aaron stood there for what felt like hours, his back pressed against the cold stone. When he finally gathered the courage to leave the chamber, the house was deathly still. As he climbed the stairs, he noticed something was different. The air felt heavier, the shadows longer, and the faint scent of lavender lingered, stronger than ever. When Aaron stepped into the main hallway, he froze. The cracked mirror from the locked room upstairs had somehow moved. It now hung on the wall directly across from the staircase, its jagged surface reflecting the dim glow of the fireplace. Aaron approached it cautiously, his reflection distorted by the cracks. For a moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But as he leaned closer, his reflection smiled. He hadn't smiled. The grin stretched unnaturally wide, and his reflection raised its hand, pointing back toward the basement. Aaron stumbled backward, the locket slipping from his grasp and landing with a metallic clink on the hardwood floor. The reflection mouthed two words. "Not yours." Aaron's instinct was to leave the house entirely, but when he turned to grab his coat from the foyer, the door was wide open. Snow blew in, leaving a trail of icy footprints leading from the threshold to the center of the room. The footprints stopped abruptly, as if whoever or whatever had entered had simply vanished. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his daze. It was a text from an unknown number. "Do you see them yet?" The message sent chills through him, and before he could process what it meant, the sound of faint humming filled the room. It was the same mournful tune he had heard in the basement, but now it came from all around him, growing louder, closer. Aaron turned to the mirror again, and this time he didn't see his reflection at all. Instead, he saw the figures he had seen outside, the man and the woman, their faces clearer now. The man's eyes burned with intensity, and the woman looked directly at him, her lips forming a single word he couldn't hear but could feel. "Return." Aaron picked up the locket, determined to end whatever had been set in motion. But as he turned it over in his hand, he realized something horrifying. It was no longer intact. The glass cover that protected the daguerreotype inside was shattered, and the image of George and Eleanor was missing, leaving only an empty frame. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the fire in the hearth, plunging the house into darkness. In the silence, Aaron heard a new sound, a rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on a surface. It was coming from the library. As he approached, the tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of pages rustling. When he opened the door, the room was empty, save for a single book lying open on the table. It wasn't one of his. The title read, "The Eternal Vow." Aaron stared at the book, his breath catching in his throat. The Eternal Vow. He had never seen it before, yet its presence in the library felt deliberate, as if it had always belonged there. The pages fluttered as if an unseen hand had just turned them, the faint hum still buzzing through the air, now quieter, but ever present. His fingers trembled as he reached for it, the moment the book touched his hand sending a jolt of cold through his arm. The pages were old, yellowed with time, but the ink remained clear, almost too clear for something so ancient. He began to read, his mind reeling with each word. The book was not a tale, it was a binding, a ritual. It detailed the unbroken connection between two souls, a bond forged not by love, but by an ancient and unyielding oath. George and Eleanor Latham had not only sworn to each other in life, but also in death, promising that neither would ever leave the estate. The page he turned to described how, when the locket was lost, the spirits would become restless, trapped between worlds. And without it, they would attempt to possess the living, binding them to the house until they, too, became part of its twisted guardianship. A chill ran through Aaron as he realized what had been happening to him. He had seen them not as ghosts but as emissaries of a far darker pact, attempting to lure him into fulfilling their eternal vow. He had been the one they had been waiting for, the one whose presence allowed the cycle to repeat. As he turned the next page, something heavy settled in his chest. The text described a final step. Asterisk, a soul must be willing to offer itself to bind the spirits. If they are rejected, they will consume everything in their path. Asterisk. Before he could process this, the door slammed shut behind him. The room plunged into utter darkness. The hum returned, now deafening, and Aaron felt a sudden pressure on his chest. The house had come alive. Suddenly, Eleanor's voice pierced the blackness. "You don't understand," she whispered from somewhere in the shadows. "We are eternal." The tapping of footsteps began again, slow and deliberate, echoing through the walls as they circled the room. But this time, it was not just the hum or the shadows that were closing in, it was the undeniable sensation of eyes watching him from every corner, drawing nearer, closer than ever before. A cold breath slid down the back of his neck, and he could feel something soft brush against his cheek. Eleanor's figure appeared in the mirror that hung on the far wall, her face pale and distorted by sorrow, her eyes full of longing and malice. She reached out, her fingers stretching across the glass as if she could pass through it to him. "Join us," she whispered. "We've waited so long." As the mirror began to crack further, the walls around Aaron groaned with the weight of time itself. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, drowned out by the echoing of an unseen figure whispering his name. The locket. Without thinking, Aaron pressed the broken locket to his chest. It was cold and heavy, its jagged edges digging into his skin as the house seemed to inhale, preparing to claim him. The footsteps, once distant, now pounded against the floorboards, rushing toward him. And then, suddenly, silence. When Aaron opened his eyes, the room was still, the hum gone, the darkness receding. The house stood in perfect stillness, as if nothing had ever happened. He was alone. The locket had vanished from his hand, and the mirror, though cracked, no longer reflected anything at all. He slowly stood, his heart racing as he glanced around the room, searching for any sign of what had just occurred. But all he saw was the fading sunlight through the windows, casting long shadows across the empty house. Aaron knew, though, that he had not escaped. The house still watched. The air still felt thick with something unseen, waiting. The ghosts of George and Eleanor Latham, bound by their eternal vow, had not let him go. They were waiting for the next chapter to begin. And no one ever truly left the Colorado estate. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.